So I think just to introduce myself,
Yes.
My name is Cris Concepcion. I lead the product and technology team at the Obama Foundation. The foundation was created by President Obama with a mission to inspire, empower, and connect a new generation of change makers. How that shows up for us right now is we have a number of leadership programs where we connect up-and-coming leaders in the US, Asia, Europe, and Africa to learn from each other. But we also have a number of community partnerships that we do through My Brother's Keeper, as well as partnerships with nonprofits focused on female empowerment and education and the Girls Opportunity Alliance. And all those existing programs will become supplemented by the work that we are also doing to open the Obama Presidential Center in the south side of Chicago in Jackson Park. We will open that in the next year, in the middle of next year. And that'll be a 19-acre campus that will include a forum, the newest branch of the Chicago Public Library, a fruit and vegetable garden, and an athletic center that will, of course, have an NBA-sized basketball court. But the crowning jewel for that will also be the Obama Museum that will tell a new generation of people about the story of Michelle and Barack Obama, and as well as the story of average everyday citizens who are part of the campaign and the administration. You know, I could talk a lot about that, but I think I'd love to cue up a video so you can hear the boss give you a preview of what's coming in his own words.
So we're in Chicago, and we set up a mock-up, a prototype of something we call Power of Words that's going to run almost the entire height of the museum building. And, you know, it's a remarkable marriage of artistry and words and texts and images and sound. You know, it really is going to give, I think, visitors of the museum a chance to immerse themselves in the spirit of our campaigns, the spirit of my administration. It's thought-provoking and beautiful. Hi, this is Barack Obama. Who am I speaking to?
President Obama campaigned and came into office really when digital was just coming of age. We had digital cameras, we were just getting smartphones, we were barely on Twitter.
This is historic, actually.
President Obama had the first POTUS Twitter account.
There we go. It's out there, baby. All the tweets.
He used those tools of social media to communicate in an entirely different way with the American public, really more of a two-way communication. President Obama was the first to have a Facebook Live from the Oval Office.
Hey, come on in.
And the first to answer questions on YouTube from citizens. He was the first president to use a filter on Snapchat. And Smithsonian commissioned a presidential bust of him created entirely in 3D. The Obama Presidential Center Museum has a variety of immersive media in it. Everything from soundscapes to large-scale projected films to digital art. Digital interactives give visitors the opportunity to participate in the story and have that back and forth. It's consistent with the way that President Obama used those tools himself. Power of Words is a 4-level film. It crosses all 4 levels of the exhibition galleries. Through that canvas, we're hoping to orient visitors as they enter each floor, but also to take over the screen with themes and artwork and visuals that cross all 4 levels. The president didn't use digital for digital's sake, and neither are we in the museum. We're using the tools that we have to make a more meaningful experience for the visitor. We are looking for opportunities for visitors to see themselves in the content and see the Obamas in a different light, and using these canvases and tools at our disposal allows us to do that.
You have a cool boss.
I am a very lucky man.
I love the quote in the video. It says, the president didn't use any digital for the digital's sake, and neither we are in the museum. Like, you are the technology leader. How do you think about the technology when you're thinking about what you're building?
Yeah, so, you know, part of what my colleague Sarah had sort of hinted at in here was that when people come to the museum, we want to ask them, like, what is top of mind for you? What is an issue that is bothering you, something that you want to act on? And we want to have interactive exhibits, which my team is building, that will ask, like, we'll present them with options. Like, say, you know, you say you want you want to make a difference in climate change. We will then suggest to you, you could look at reducing your own carbon footprint. You could look at changing over to more renewable fuels, have a conversation within your school or within your workplace about making that conversion. And if you engage on that, then we will also tell you about other leaders who have, in our network, who have done that. So now our visitors will come in with their problems and we will have them leave with a blueprint, a role model, and course for action. And what we hope to be able to do within that experience is that they will be able to follow with us and sort of sign up for newsletters and updates so that we can continue that conversation post the visit. Because it's important for us to build this picture of who is coming to the center, what they care about, because I think one of the things we've talked a lot about in this set of conversations in this summit is that challenge of engaging with our audience as it becomes more complex, more fractured. People are listening to different channels, they're listening to different, different causes are on top of their mind, they're trusting different people. And as we try to build that landscape through visitor data and having our audience tell us who they are, we want to be able to marry that up to the wealth of content that we are holding on to, that we want to be able to customize, personalize, and deliver to our audience where they're at.
I was, at least in my case, and I wasn't born and raised in these countries, like some people realize by my perfect accents. But for me, it was just a few years ago when I first went to an actual presidential library that is more like a museum. How many people have been to a presidential library here? Raise your hand. Well, some people have, but it looks more like a museum,
yes.
Right?
Yes. And what we are trying to do within the Presidential Center is to really be a living institution, right? Not a testament to the past. Like the past of the administration is resonant, it is important, but what we think of as success for ourselves is not just the number of tickets that we sell, the number of people who come into the door, but the number of people who take action, right? We want people to come away from this being inspired to act in their own community and be able to measure that and move on that. That is what we think of as success for ourselves. And we want to involve their stories in the continuing presence and mission of what the Presidential Center will provide for all of us.
Especially because, again, Obama was one kind of the first president to be part of that digital revolution. I assume that there is a huge amount of content, much more than, I would say, much more than majority of the presidents before Obama. Where are you getting all the content? How does that work? Who hosts all that content today?
Well, we are very fortunate to have this rich amount of content that was created natively during his administration, but it's also presenting a great challenge. We have just finished a massive project with the National Archives where they have transferred over 2.7 million photographs, 61 terabytes of data, and they've entrusted us with copies of that. That is very well described because it is very much created digitally. But we are working and partnering with Microsoft to use Azure Vision Cognitive Services to enrich our understanding of what that corpus looks like. We already know from what the National Archives has given us about who took this photo, when was the photo taken, but we would love to be able to use visual recognition to really catalog who is in this, where this is fit into the arc of history, where has this been taken, and how might we connect it to other stories and other images that we have within our corpus and that we will continue to generate over time.
And from, in that experience, with all these materials, that are huge amounts of materials, what do you hope to show?
Sure. I think even just doing that first stage of tagging and marking all this content and making it searchable will already be a massive benefit for our marketing, communications, development, and exhibition teams as they're wrapping their hands around this content. But we look to expand beyond that to essentially map things out with node-based graphs of understanding with, say, the Affordable Care Act, which just celebrated its 15-year anniversary 4 days ago. How did that play out within the White House? And how did that reverberate in communities that benefit from increased access to healthcare? And how do we then link that to this work that our leaders are doing today to continue to improve healthcare within this country and this world? Because we all know, Healthcare isn't fixed yet. It's going to be a continuing challenge for all of us, and it will be something that I think we will want our visitors to take up the mantle of, and we want their stories to become part of the stories that we tell, so that this content engine that we have will continue to evolve and grow with time. Not just about the historical legacy of the Obamas, but also the continuing participation of our community in these vital issues that we are facing.
Do you have, like, in that data, because I assume at one point, and I don't remember, but at one point someone named it Obamacare, no? Like that it didn't came out of the, is that part of the?
We are very much tagging as the Affordable Care Act, but I think, certainly, the story of Obamacare, I mean, like, the thing about the corpus is that's not just a story of the administration, it's a story of the entire country. And I think as we are looking at and mapping the ways in which we think about healthcare in this country, are other themes that the administration has been involved in, I think it's important for us to be faithful to how we think about it, how we've applied thought to it, and to reflect all the ways in which it has evolved over time, past the administration and into the future.
You have spoken a little bit about the making storytelling at the center live.
Yeah.
What does that look like in practice?
For us, what we are imagining as we open the center is that, the focus and the spotlight will be very much focused on the work of Michelle and Barack Obama, but that over time, we want that spotlight to move into the work of our leaders, to move into the work of our visitors, because we want people to come to the center, not just to learn, but also to be inspired and also to have that point of activation for themselves and to want to be a part of that story, to want to bring their friends and their family and their communities into that story so that they themselves can use that as a platform for the change that they want to see.
You have, on the metrics side, once this starts, there are clearly metrics of success, like I assume people visiting, but then you have more like the outcomes, like you mentioned. Are you thinking about that measurement framework on how to think about success? Like what type of metrics would you like to move? And I know it's very difficult from an outcome perspective.
Well, for this, I would want to recognize my colleagues and my brother's keeper, who are probably the ones who are leading the charge with using metrics-based outcomes to tell their story. My brother's keeper, they have a series of milestones as they are working with like city government as well as nonprofit groups and community groups that they really are tied to improvements in the lives of boys and young men of color. One of those, as an example, is exposure to violence, and that can be decomposed in things like the murder rate. And one example that we would use is that my brother's keeper in Newark would partner with the city government, community groups, to look at how do you drive down the murder rate in Newark. They were able to achieve a 30% decrease in that by treating it as a public health concern. And being able to tell that story in both our newsletters and our communication with donors, we saw that being like the highest engaging content that we would have with our audience in the New York area. That would outperform, anything that we would use about the Obamas themselves, because we have learned that content that is directly relevant to the immediate circumstances of an audience is something that they will engage on, it's something that they will support, and we want to be able, within our understanding of our media, to meet the stories that they can tell with the stories that our audience wants to hear, so that we can deliver that more personalized content to people in a much more scalable and automated way.
Nonprofits in general, often sometimes struggle with the data readiness and the ability to extract meaningful insight from the data, right? Like data for the sake of data is not useful, but if we can use the data to create an impact, what advice would you give to other nonprofit organizations?
Before I became a leader, my individual contributor world was being a data engineer, so that question comes near and dear to my heart. I want to call back to something that Mustafa Suleyman has said in the morning keynote, where he said that our systems are getting to the point now where, we don't need to have perfect data. Right? When we think about data readiness, it is probably important for us to just get the data into the system. And one of the things that we would see at the foundation was that people would get sort of very wrapped up around getting their data to be pristine, having, correcting all of the misspellings and typos. And one of the things that we've had to help educate our colleagues about is that within our systems, these systems can work with these assets at scale. So we can batch update thousands and hundreds of photographs and videos at once, rather than have to do it all by hand. So don't let perfect get in the way of getting started. Get started as soon as you can. But as you work through it, the other thing I would also like call out to is my own other colleagues on the conservation side of the museum. One thing that's been really fascinating about understanding museum conservation is that all the work that's done to repair an old campaign poster, an old T-shirt or garment, all of those changes, they are done in a way that is reversible and maintains the original condition of the artifact, because it is important as technology and as techniques evolve over time to undo that and apply the next change for this. And I would say that to relate that to a data perspective is important to understand what changes you had made, whether it's through transaction logs, change logs, commits, other documentation you have, so you know as you're enriching your data and adding to it why that happened, what you had done, because as your assumptions change and as your models and desires for that data will change, you will want that to evolve over time. You will want to know what do I need to update, what do I need to correct, and be able to have that explained not just to yourselves, but to your future teams who will be working within these data sets. So think very deeply, don't get started right away, but think very deeply about how you want to track those changes and make sure that things can be reversible and updatable as your data needs evolve.
Cris, thank you very much for the time, and we will look forward for next year.
Yes, thank you, Juan.